served as a role model for women, which many of the organizations recognize, as an advocate of justice for women, children, and victims of crime for more than 3 decades. Beth is also a founding member and past president of the Santa Barbara Women's Political Committee, so we are extremely proud of her. She's a fighter and a visionary, one who has demonstrated over and over what it means to have and be a feminist in office. And today she's going to talk to us about the passage of the California Fair Pay Bill, the strongest one in the country. Believe it or not, the strongest one we have today.
But thank you. It's so wonderful to be home, to be with my peeps. Lois, I give you major props for your patience and willingness to put up with what I couldn't put up with. And I'm so proud that we are Californians. We are really leading the nation in so many areas, whether it comes to global climate change, something that our colleague and Papa Das Williams has been helping lead the fight on. He's also obviously an up-and-coming politician as the next generation. I want to thank the young people who are here because we need your help. We need you to pick up the baton and run with it. However, this generation, you want to do it in 5-inch heels and tight dresses, it's okay with me as long as I don't have to do that. Or maybe you'll realize I'm trying to wear heels. I thought this would be cool today. My feet are killing me. But for those of you, whatever it takes, because the battle is not only not won. We are fighting, as I look at the way Planned Parenthood is fighting, we are fighting for our very existence nationally. But if you fast forward, if you just look forward, if you just look today, here in California, the extraordinary work that we are doing, the extraordinary strides that we are making. You know, the California's historian is a fellow named Kevin Starr. Kevin Starr, he's the librarian, or was a librarian, the key historian. He calls California the state that invents the future. And when you think about that and the fact that really nothing is impossible in California, we have a limitless potential. And it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I tell people here in California, we don't care if we do it right as long as we're first. And in many respects, and I'm going to talk about the Fair Pay, Equal Pay Bill, we are first. But before I do that, I have to take a moment. We refer to it as personal privilege when we want to say something that's completely off track. On Sunday, 2 very good friends of mine, Vera Carbaugh and Judy Duff, got married after 20 years, and they met in my home on a political day. So Judy and Vera, muscle park. Not afraid of diversity, we embrace diversity. We embrace the fact that America is supposed to be a place where anyone who works hard, plays by the rules, and does their best has a chance for the great American dream. We live that here in California. And so when I started working on the Equal Pay Bill, it was about 30 years ago when I was appointed by then Governor Jerry Brown I. And I reminded him when we had our, I'll talk a little about that, we had a wonderful bill signing for this bill at the Rosie the Riveter Museum up in Richmond, California. And he doesn't have jet black hair anymore. In fact, he doesn't have any hair anymore. I reminded him that we took on this task back during the era when he was first governor, and he appointed me to the State Commission on the Status of Women. And my hair actually was black as well then. We called it Equal Pay for Work of Comparable Value. There are probably a few of us in the room here remember we talked about comparable worth. So this has been a battle for decades. And I've been working on putting together a bill a year ago to try to finally, after all these years, to get equal pay. I mean, it just makes sense. Today, over 50% of the women here in California are in the workforce. Of that, 70% are either the sole breadwinner for their families, the primary breadwinner, or their income is necessary for families to meet their basic necessities. Women work because they have to work. Many women who don't have to work and work because they are able is also something that we should have a choice in whether or not we want to do that. But for many women in this state, there is no choice. So back in the day when we were talking about comparable worth, a woman made 57 cents or 59 cents for every dollar a man made. Today, it's 84 cents. That's if you're a white woman. If you're an African American woman, you make 64 cents for every dollar. And if you're a Latina, you make 44 cents. It is the largest pay gap for Latinas in the nation, right here in California. And clearly, this has got to change. What that translates to in California alone is that because of this disparity in pay, women leave $39 billion a year on the table that we don't get to take home to care for our families, to provide food and shelter and the necessities of life. Now, when you think about that, if you're a business person, you think, that's money that could go right in my pocket. And that was one of the linchpins to get this bill passed. The other linchpin, the match that lit this simmering challenge, was something that happened about a year ago, just this past week. I don't know if any of you watched the Academy Awards. I'm uncool and I'll admit it, I watched them. There was a woman named Patricia Arquette who had played a fascinating role in a fascinating film called Boyhood. What made this film fascinating was a story about a little boy growing up. But it was filmed over a period of 12 years as this little boy grew up. And she played the role of his mother. And as part of that role, she experienced divorce, single parenthood, moving back in with her mother, marrying for desperation or in desperation in order to have financial security. And she actually really got into the fact that her plight reflected on this young boy's ability and opportunity and mental and physical well-being. And how hard she worked in this role. I mean, she really got into this role. When she got her Oscar for her performance, her extraordinary performance, she took her 45 seconds of fame to tell the 4 billion people in the world, apparently, who watch these Academy Awards, that it was time for equal pay. And the camera flashed to Meryl Streep and Jennifer Lopez, who was with her, and they jumped up. You go, girl. That's what they were saying. And suddenly, there was an explosion. It was literally a match that got lit. I got on the phone with my staff, and I said, we've got to introduce this bill now. So Tuesday morning in the Capitol, we held a press conference, standing room only. All the women of the Legislative Women's Caucus standing with me, we introduced the Equal Pay Bill. Now, I knew that in order to get this passed, I needed to get the support of the business community. You know, this is not anything to be afraid of. I showed them that's $39 billion more in goods and services that people will use because, you know, these are folks who don't have money to put into a 401k or to put into a savings account. Every dime they make goes to provide for their families. So I happen to have done some work with a woman who represents the Chamber of Commerce. Full disclosure, I don't usually see eye to eye with the Chamber of Commerce. In fact, I often pride myself in having the largest number of job killer bills that they put on their list. Because a lot of them are crazy. I mean, there are some things where you might argue that we are, you know, going to depress the business community, but when it's things like protecting children from pesticides that are being applied, and that's a job killer, you know they're way off base. But they have a wonderful young woman lobbyist, tall, attractive, blonde woman. I asked her to come into my office and sit down and talk to me. And I said to her, Jennifer, I'm going to do an equal pay bill this year, and I want you to help me get it passed. And I know that you can because you are smart enough, and you will because I know you are not being paid what your male counterparts are being paid. And she, doing a good job, just smiled. We sat down. They didn't like the words comparable worth, so I said, what works for you? They said, work that's substantially similar. I said, okay with me. apparently there had been a couple cases that had come down that used that phrase, and they didn't want to, confuse people. I said, that's just perfectly fine. And with the help of 29 advocacy groups, we don't do any of this alone. When people have campaigns, I used to think, and they'd say we, our campaign, I think, well, that's kind of arrogant, the kingly we. But when you get into this, every campaign, every elected officer, every politician, whatever you want to call us, statespeople, I prefer myself. It sounds a little better than politician in today's world. But we have a group of extraordinary people who work with us, who are behind the scenes, and I just want to take the opportunity to ask my staff, my district staff, if they would just stand up. Many of you have met them. If you'd stand up and take a round of applause for the great work that they do. Okay, that's in lieu of raises, but we're also just kidding. They are extraordinary young people, and it is always a thrill to be able, hopefully, to inspire them. I have several of my staff who have left to run for office, others are going to go to law school. I think I'm being too effective in motivating them to go on to other things, but they have been extraordinary and very helpful, as have the 29 groups, including a group called Equal Rights Advocates. AAUW stepped up to the plate, provided us with legitimate science and data on what this all means. So why, after 35 years of fighting this battle for comparable worth, were we able to get 40 votes out of 40 in the California Senate and 78 out of 80 in the State Assembly? We got two real Michiganers there who would vote for the But we had overwhelming bipartisan support. By the time we were done, the Chamber of Commerce came out in support of the bill, and all business groups either supported it or were neutral as to its impacts. So, again, how did this happen? Well, look, let's face it. If we talk about just women, we don't get anywhere. When we talked about women when it came to domestic violence, and this is something many of us have been working on this, we started the first domestic violence shelter here in Santa Barbara in 1975 or 76. We called it the Violence in the Family Project. You got to bring the family in. You have to bring children in, because if you don't, somehow or other, we kind of don't matter. That makes me very angry, but in the political world, you do whatever it's going to take to get what it is you need. And in this case, we talked about how women are the primary breadwinners for their families, or a significant breadwinner for their families, their children's well-being, as well as women's well-being. So when we talked about this as an economic issue, that was the common chord that we were able to strike with the business community. And now, while California has prohibited gender-based discrimination since 1949, the fact is that the courts, in their infinite, I would project potentially primarily male wisdom, decided that equal had to be exactly the same. But we know that no two people do a job exactly the same. So we were still having an unacceptable wage gap, gender wage gap, and particularly among women of color. So we now, fast forward, have a bill that was initially based on the Federal Equal Pay Act. It actually is. I think it was Barbara Mikulski who had introduced it 100 years ago. I mean, not 100 years ago, but a long time ago, and haven't been able to get it passed. We've worked on that as a model. And what we did is, the bill now does a few very critical things. First of all, you can't complain about what you don't know. You remember the Lilly Ledbetter bill? Lilly Ledbetter spent 17 years not knowing what her male colleagues were making who worked side by side with her. Why? Because her contract prohibited her from talking about her compensation. She found out, I learned this not long ago, she found out that she was being paid less than her male counterparts and arguably doing more work and more successfully when somehow or other one of her colleagues' pay stubs ended up on her desk. That is how she learned that she was not being paid fairly. She tried to bring suit. The Supreme Court, including one who is no longer with us, decided that it was too late. She should have brought her suit earlier, even though there was no way she could know. So the first thing we did in this bill, or one of the first things, is that an employee will no longer face retaliation by her employer for asking about the wages being paid to other employees. So you're at the water cooler and you say, you know, Joe, I don't know, can you tell me, will you tell me what you're being paid? If Joe says, I don't want to, Joe doesn't have to. But, you know, people kind of share that information, and now they'll be able to do it without retaliation. And during the whole time we had this, we were doing our legislation, we had this phenomenal woman from Fresno who had a master's degree in math, and I could be a little off here, but the gist of it is, I know she had a master's degree. She worked for the county of Fresno, and she is the sole breadwinner. She has 3 little daughters, 6 and down to 8 months. God bless her. Her husband is a stay-at-home dad because with her master's degree and all, she can earn better than he. And because of our paucity of adequate child care in this state and country, that's another topic I won't get into today, but we are still working on that, by the way. We have an $800 million ask in on the budget this year to put more slots for more children to get child care and more wages to be paid for the providers, because you shouldn't be getting paid $2.98 an hour to care for children. So, but lest I digress. But you can applaud it. Let me know if you think we should. Yash, we're not such a perfect child. He's doing childcare today. He's not just trying to show off his baby, at least that's what he tells me. And this is a major problem. So this woman decided she was going to be, and she and her husband, and he's a really nice guy, decided she was going to be the one out there. And lo and behold, she discovered, and I'm not exactly sure how, that 2 of her male counterparts who came to work after she did for the county, had less in the way of degrees, less experience, and were not as qualified as she. Were being paid $12,000 a year more than she was. That's a lot of money. So she objected, and they said, that's just too bad, those are our rules, and that's the way it goes. So she came up and testified what that meant for her family. And here was a live person, no argument from anybody that she was more qualified. But the county said they were paying her less because they could. But this bill says, you can't. And we got a letter from her. This is what makes this job, I think, so meaningful. She sent a letter, was it through the office, saying, I found myself driving to work yesterday with tears in my eyes, because as a result of this bill, I am now going to be given the respect as well as the salary that I deserve. And I want to thank you for making that happen. So those are the kind of things that really... So we go further than the federal proposal in providing that women can challenge pay discrimination based on wages paid other workers at different different work sites as their current employer. They can challenge discrimination based on wages paid to workers doing substantially similar work. Why is it when you go into a hotel, there's a janitor who's shining the ballroom floor and a housekeeper who's breaking her back making those beds with those heavy mattresses and cleaning up people's rooms who aren't necessarily taking particularly respectful care of those rooms? Women are clearly paid less as housekeepers than the men who are doing the janitorial work. This bill says they're going to have to reevaluate by the work that's being done, and not just by the occupation. What is the work that's being done? So hopefully we will, and of course 95% of the housekeepers are women and 95% of the janitors are men. So that is one of the elements as well. And employers now are going to have the burden to show that the basis for the pay differential is something that is acceptable, that is a legitimate business purpose, and is not based on or derived from a gender bias. So in other words, it has to be a gender-blind distinction. And I saw this, if you go to the symphony, and it's something my husband and I have been doing for decades. Used to be some very few women playing in the top symphony orchestras in the world. And we have this wonderful CAMA program. The Santa Barbara Symphony is also a wonderful symphony. New West Symphony in Ventura is an outstanding symphony as well. Now I go to the symphony, and I have for years, I count how many women there are. And the number of women has increased significantly, probably geometrically. So I found out not long ago that under the rules of the International Symphonic, whatever they call themselves, when you are now auditioning people for an orchestra, you audition them behind a curtain. Behind a curtain. So that what you get is exactly what you should get, is the best musicians. This is something that we need to strive for here. And again, it's going to be the burden on employers to show that the factor by which they're paying a man more is job-related and reasonable. And this is where we really kind of pull in the reins here. That the non-discriminatory factors relied upon are the only basis for the pay differential. So you have to show that there is no other way to do this, and that the non-gender-based bias, if you will, or that there is no gender-based bias, but that the differential is based on a non-gender basis, and it is the entire difference in pay. So this is something, after we got this bill passed, we now have a lawsuit that's actually been filed by the female attorneys at Farmers Insurance Company, are claiming they're being paid less than their male counterparts. But perhaps, and there are two ways you can go about trying to redress this now, through the Department of Industrial Relations, the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. You can go administratively, or you can file a lawsuit. Now, part of the yin and the yang of getting the support from the chamber is that if you bring a lawsuit, you can get your wage differential. And remember, a lot of compensation isn't just your pay, but your retirement benefits and the other things that you may have been discriminated against. You get that, and you can get attorney's fees. So, but the goal here, as I keep trying to emphasize, is to get compliance, not more litigation. So just after this bill was signed into law, a big announcement came from a major company called Salesforce, which announced that they had voluntarily reviewed their pay scales. They had voluntarily looked at the way they pay people based upon job specifications and not occupational criteria, and discovered they were paying their women $3 million a year less than their men. And they made that adjustment, and of course it's a great PR thing. Intel has now come out saying that they are going to do the same thing. Kaiser says that they believe they pay appropriately, but they're going to go back and do a check on what they pay. I did a webinar last week in Los Angeles with a terrific employment lawyer who represents a lot of major corporations at Munger Tolls, so I told people listening that this was, pay attention, this is very expensive advice that you're getting for free, and we are hoping to see all companies do this. One of the things that I think is really very encouraging about this as well is I happen to be talking to some young folks, 40s, that's young to me, and these are young, successful men in the business world here in town, in industries that are very male-dominated. But at least two of them told their respective employers that they needed to reevaluate what they were paying their female colleagues because they knew they weren't paying them fairly. And lo and behold, the adjustments were made. So my point is, I think in today's world, I think, the same way young people, and many of us old folks, but I think there are many differences in the generations that are succeeding us old ladies who started the Women's Political Committee. And that is, they see equity and fairness as a no-brainer. The notion that we announced a wedding that took 20 years in the making, for them is, well, what's the big deal? Of course, these people should be able to celebrate their love for each other. And I think the same thing is happening with gender issues as well. And now, that doesn't mean that we don't have biases and all. Indeed, there are many to this day. But I think it's a matter of principle. Most young men and most young people believe in equality. and that they are prepared, and we have to call them on it when they're not, these TV shows like Men Behaving Badly are not the kind of role modeling we want to see. But I think just as a matter of principle, that if a woman is doing the job as well as a man, she should get paid the same. And so I do have optimism and hope going forward that we are going to make these significant changes. I will tell you, I was invited back to Washington, D.C., to the White House to talk about this equal pay bill, and I will leave you with this. I met the president, I got my handshake and shoulder bump. But I was asked to talk at a conference about how we got this equal pay bill done. It was a 3-day conference. I was on the last panel on the last day, right after lunch, and I was the last speaker. And I thought, oh, this is not what you want as a speaker. And I thought everybody was going to be tired, everybody was going to be overloaded with what was going on. I told them the story about how we got this equal pay bill done, and there are other states that are interested in doing it. And when I was done, I got a standing ovation. And so that is the message of stand up, ladies and gents, and young people, and little babies to boot, and let's change the world. It's our time. Thank you.
For questions, Barbara Lindemann is going to facilitate this, and I'm going to try to keep an eye on who would like to ask questions. We have a wonderful opportunity here to pursue some of the interesting things that you shared with us. So I'm going to turn this over to you.
And you can ask about Patricia Arquette, too.
As far as I know, we don't have a rotating mic, so you'll really have to stand and speak up for your question.
Could you speak a little bit about the child care or preschool or whatever the family support is?
Speak
Have the question repeated?
I'll do it. Talk about child care or preschool. So when we went through the recession, we lost 100,000 slots, 100,000 places for children in preschool during the recession. And we have been struggling to get those positions back. When you lose the slots, and we were still 200,000, estimated 200,000 slots short. So, and these are generally slots for low-income women, many of whom are barely getting by, and many of whom work in non-traditional hours, like from 11 at night to 7 in the morning. Or there's one woman I met not long ago who's a baker. She has to get up at 3 in the morning. She has an infant. Has to find childcare at 4 o'clock in the morning on till noon. This is not easy. So we lost those slots, and of course we also lost the providers, because there very little money is paid to certainly the providers who work in home. We have a lot of people who open their homes for childcare. We don't have enough slots, enough facilities for the centers, for child centers. And I would like to challenge the city of Santa Barbara and the county of Santa Barbara to start thinking about on-site childcare for your workers, because it's a win-win if you put that together. But until we do that, the part of the discussion is there's a political battle going on. Preschool. Preschool comes under Prop 98. Okay, Prop 98 is the initiative that we passed in California that basically says that no less than 40% of the general fund should go to education. Education being defined as preschool up through community college. Well, what about 0 to 3? We have discovered over the past several years with the sophistication in brain mapping that in fact the most critical time in a child's development is from 0 to 3, arguably 0 to 2. We have absolutely nothing. Anyone who has an infant knows that the cost of infant care is almost prohibitive. It's almost prohibitive. So what the Women's Caucus has been trying to do is trying to get more consideration for that 0 to 3 period, as well as, and we're making some strides getting Prop 98 money, pre-K, back to provide slots that were lost during the recession. But we are so short of slots. Last year, we were able to get $265 million in the budget, but that went out of Prop 90, it was a mess. But it went out of Prop 98. It's just that, the teachers, and rightly so, there's been such a fall off in services and support for our teachers and for our K through community college that they wanted all the money that was available. And so the battle is, where can we get that additional money? But we must, I took a trip, the Senate took a trip to Scandinavia. And if any of you have been to Scandinavia, you realize they have cradle to grave. They give their men and women a year to a year and a half of fully paid, fully protected, meaning you get your job back, maternity leave. And then you have either fully underwritten or substantially underwritten early care from 1.5 to 5 when kids go to school. And then college is free, and university is free, healthcare is free, and you get a pension at the end of life. They're the happiest people on the planet.
Hannah Beth, we could listen to Hannah Beth all afternoon.